Teams now, are you?
Yeah. We lost our Zoom license.
Teams seems like it'd be more challenging to do a meeting like this.
I'm not for doing all team, so I'm not against it.
Hey guys, how are you? Good.
How's it going?
Good, good. How are you?
Pretty good.
Hey, Jackie.
Yes.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Got a chance to pull up any of that data. Building, commercial buildings.
I sent to you a long time ago.
Did you get it all?
Yeah. Well, you're talking about the zoning and the parcel layer and all that?
What I'm looking for is, I'm working with ABC.
Yeah.
I want to know every commercial building in the county. And I think there's only like, there are 9,000. There's not that many.
There's not that many. So I sent you like what's called a REST layer, which is a GIS like source file. Did you
Okay.
get that? Or did
Well,
you-
I
did
don't,
you
my
help?
assistant does all my emails,
Yes.
so let me dig in. I bet you she didn't know what it
Okay.
was. So let me go back, let me research that. I keep asking for it, but I'm like, have they seen anything come across? But I don't think she knew what she was looking for, so.
I'm going to just double check, before we get started, Dee, or Daniel, since we both are in the meeting, can you see me okay?
Yes, I can see the picture. Mhm.
Okay, are you able to turn your camera on as well?
Just let me see right now. Yep, there it
Okay,
is.
great, all right, I'm gonna mute and turn the, camera off until we get started.
Good evening, everybody. I will go ahead and call to order the January administrative meeting of the Plan Commission. Jackie, can you call the roll for us?
Yes, I can. Start with D. Owens online.
Yes.
Great. Carol Munson. Present. Clemens. Yes. Jeff Morris.
Here.
Julie Thomas. Here. Frank Garrison.
I am present.
Edward Holman.
I'm never present.
So we have in-person forum in our city planning commission member Chris Cochran. And I don't believe that Jerry Pittsford is able to join us. I think Tron is attending late. I haven't heard from him, but we do have an.
I don't think we have any members of the public, do we? So we can jump right into administrative business, which is the county development ordinance work session.
Okay. Yes. I did also want to pass out, I sent this to, or just passed it out to Jeff and Edward since they were here a little bit ago, but this is
Everyone or did Jeff and Edward?
everyone gets a copy. They already have a copy though. Just want to keep you updated on some state legislation that's coming down the pike. There's been a possible request for, or I guess, being told that there is going to be a possible challenge to our 15% countywide slope restriction, and that there may be a bill proposed that would change it to more like 25% if that were to be enacted. So, Dee, I apologize, I don't have it up on the screen, I was trying to get my second.
I'll scan it and send it to her right now.
Okay, we'll get to a copy shortly, but that's part of what we can discuss tonight, the work session. But I do have just a presentation to keep us. Sorry, we're learning Teams, we're switching over from Zoom to Teams, so bear with us a little bit. But I do have just a quick outline of what I'd like to go over today, and if there are other items for discussion, we can go over that. And then hoping to use the time wisely tonight, since this is only a work session. So just some quick discussion items. I want to just wrap up and go over a little bit of what we went over last meeting. I want to go over for two new things today, a review of the consolidated use examples and just pull up two consolidated uses from an Excel spreadsheet that staff put together prior, which is on the right-hand side is going to be all the existing uses. On the left-hand side is going to be what we're consolidating that use into, and see what questions or issues we might have. And then also introduce the CDO survey request results that we've been getting in, and go over what we'll be asking the Plan Commission to vote on for that. And then finally, just some remaining questions for you all about next steps. Okay, so just a quick summary from our December 5th meeting. So we went through a few examples of addresses with uses. We looked at the 2-pagers from the CDO module. I think you all had a pretty successful conversation with your group partners and were able to look over some of those examples. I didn't receive any notes from anyone or any emails or feedback. Just want to pause to see if anyone wants to report back on anything quickly, or if there are notes that I'll be, if you wanted to send any of your notes of hey, I didn't like how this worked, or.
So Tron took our notes and he was going to do something very elaborate to send to you.
Okay.
So he may yet do it.
Okay, still need a little bit more time. All right.
Or if he shows up, we can ask him if he's so bad.
Okay,
So you're looking for, and I missed this at the last meeting because I was late, but you're looking for just any commentary on this entire, what we have in our package.
so basically, if you ran through an example, so I think Cheryl's example, if I could use your example, was there was a lot on East Point Road near the Point PUD that's zone limited business. And the question was, could a restaurant cafe go in on this property? Technically, the use is yes, but the lot size is pretty constrained. And so if you went to the 2-pager and you looked up restaurant cafe and then you went to the permitted standards, there was nothing in there that said, you had to have a certain number of, acreage or what have you. So it's sort of like, oh, I found this exercise to be helpful. I think that you should add a standard, a restaurant, cafe, something to that effect.
So, okay, so I wasn't here for that exercise portion.
Sure.
It was a good one.
So would it be useful just for me to send general notes on that?
Absolutely. If you have general notes, I'm just trying to find ways to get.
Got a
some
collection, I
feedback.
have to put them in one place.
Okay.
They're all like
Yes.
written everywhere.
That's what
Yeah.
we're looking for, is just ways to
Okay.
kind of get your feedback, start incorporating that, have
Got it.
questions, answers.
Great, thank you, perfect.
And then, we did discuss adding estate density residential zoning and then eliminating urban density residential. And we talked about shifting that in the use table, so we're still working on drafting that. There was a question since then about, a concern about the word suburban in any of our zoning districts in the county. So I wanted to bring that up as a possible question to you all. Do you want me to further refine the list of zones? Is it just a challenge of use of wording, or is there other concerns with the zones the staff has laid out prior? And I could pull that up if that would be helpful.
I guess, what is the,
I think we should.
what is the purpose behind eliminating the word suburban?
So we have a zoning district right now in the county that's suburban residential. And in the new draft, it's supposed to be like kept or kind of in line with that to keep it as suburban density. And I think there was a concern about the use of the word suburban to describe areas of the county, as to whether that's reflective of the, if there was other word choices for the zoning, the designation that made more sense.
So what is the, I guess I'd have to look at what the density figures are for each of these other districts, suburban, state, low, medium, and high. Well, no, it's not high, but to compare those. Can you tell us what those are off the top of your head?
So suburban is 1 acre. The state density that we're adding is 0.67. Low density is 0.34. And then you have medium density 0.21. High density is 0.14. So if there's a question about just, at the end, if it's just a question of naming, with the different name changes, we can make that change pretty quickly. If it's a question of, number of zones or the design standard of a certain zone, then I think that's like a bigger answer that we would like to have sooner rather than later. I wanted to bring that to your attention. There was a question about use of the word suburban and whether that was appropriate.
Well, I don't like it as a comparison to high, medium, and low.
Okay.
But I don't have anything to offer that comes to mind.
Okay. So maybe, would it be helpful if in a future work session, staff put together a spectrum of residential zones and put near the acreages of the minimum lot sizes, or?
Yeah.
I think that's always good to have when we're
Okay.
looking at this, because we do have it for agricultural, forest, and conservation.
Right. Okay.
And it could be rural density residential, just to call these areas around Bloomington suburbs is kind of an inverse of a relationship, because actually Bloomington is more dependent upon county than vice versa because of the university.
All right, and then lastly, just the ending summary point is there was a discussion of having public engagement on modules 1 through 3 once fully drafted prior to the plan commission hearings. We heard that the advertising would be a public engagement meeting before the hearings, but not include an official mailer. It would just be something that we would advertise as to not confuse the public about the mailing for the official hearings. That was sort of the summary of that.
So you see, so do you think even just sending out a postcard would be too confusing? I get that it would be, that it would be confusing to the public about this is just an informational meeting versus a public hearing and you want them to provide comments, so so you don't want to detract from that. So I don't know if that's even something that would be worthwhile. Certainly, I don't think it should be wrapped into a bill,
Right,
assessor or whatever.
yeah,
I don't think that will work well.
right. There was an offline discussion about could we insert something in like, something that's
Sorry.
already going out to the public, could we put it in someone's assessment or tax bill? And I don't know that that would be clear to the public. That would be helpful. So if we send a postcard for the public engagement meeting and then subsequently send a postcard for the public hearings, I do worry that people would maybe start to confuse the two dates or show up for one and not the other. Though I think it would be helpful to get a broader reach of people.
Yeah.
So
We don't have a newspaper like we did last time we did this. You know what I mean?
Right.
We just don't have a
Can
widely
you
read.
call it something different than a meeting? Can you call it a workshop or a work session?
I have a question for Dave, if I might. The public hearing portion of it actually has to be in a letter, doesn't it? Because it has to have information specific to the property? Or can it be a postcard?
Last time we did it, it could have fit on a postcard.
Okay.
Basically saying that identifying their property and saying, could be said, it's being considered to be rezoned as this, or here's the link to see where your property is rezoned.
Okay, great. Well, that's really good news. That's super
Yeah, I
good news.
don't think it has to be that specific.
Okay, great. Well, then, we just need to think about how to get the word out. That's,
always open to doing that. So
Yeah,
that was something we discussed last time. I don't know if we want to reopen that discussion or vote on it or.
No, I'm good with it. I just wanted to hear what thoughts have gone behind that. And it makes sense that it would be confusing. And you don't want to say it's a presentation because you do want comment.
Right,
So it's a hearing, but it's not a public hearing.
right,
But it's in public.
right.
So are we saying there would just be one postcard or letter or whatever sent out before?
Hearing.
The hearing. All right.
So excuse me, Jackie, so the UD and the ED. Now, when we talked about the ED, that came up originally at the at the ordinance review committee. Where we felt that we needed to discuss a density that was somewhere between, I think, 0.5 and 1. Am I correct on that? We've got a zone classification of a half an acre, right? In the new. So are the UD and the urban density and the state density, those are mutually exclusive? I mean, why would we, they just happen to walk down the path at the same time?
They are mutually exclusive. We were just looking at this page in particular on the draft. And we're looking at the zones that we have in the ordinance. And we're just trying to make sure that we have a comprehensive list of all the zones that we want to see in the county.
So we've had the UD in there since the beginning, correct?
We currently have an urban residential zoning district, but it actually is much more in line with high density. The reason that we changed urban density and added it to this draft is because of the areas formerly had jurisdiction over by the city of Bloomington Planning. And we have a chapter in our current ordinance that reflects that old zoning that had a much higher density back then. But right now, if you were to go to the city's ordinance and look at their highest density, you would not find it similar to what we have. So we don't think it would be appropriate to have a zoning designation with the lot size smaller than the smallest lot size in the
Okay.
city, so.
And then what is the, and I think you said this, but what is the HD 0.14?
Yes,
And that's the next,
that's the smallest
That's the
zoning
next
district we will have in the CDO. And that will be accommodated for both the urban areas and also the urbanizing areas. And then also in the rural communities, we also have that size of a lot. And some of the, you know, Steinsville or Smithville, we have a few lots that are of that size.
so then the uses of the UD that was in the ordinance before and what's in the current CDO draft, at least the way it's starting,
Yes.
the uses within that district of UD will the uses in the HD at 0.14, the uses that were in the UD at 0.07, they'll be consistent.
Yes, that would be the way we would draft it.
There's a density component, then there's also a use component, right?
There is,
And
yes.
that's what I was asking, that was the other question I had. Okay.
Yes, I think what we would do is a draft, and of course you all have the final say, and the commissioners have the final say, is that we would draft this to just kind of take over the HD column with what the UD was allowing, because in this example here, we had, you know, an acknowledgement that if we had multifamily dwelling, 3 to 4 units, it would have, you know, would it be permitted with standards in one of these zones and conditional in the rest? And I think there was a discussion at one of the work sessions that, yes, it should be permitted with standards in the most dense area that has access to infrastructure and services, but conditional in the rest. So I would take that to mean if we were getting rid of this column, I would change the HD use table to say permitted with standards and then leave it conditional in these 2 other zones.
Thanks, that's helpful.
Okay. So what I would like to discuss with you all today is what we are proposing to do in terms of uses. So we talked about last time a conversion chart of, you know, we have 45 zones and we're trying to get that to a more manageable number such as 16 zones. We're still open to adding back in zones as you see fit if something is missing. We haven't received any feedback to that effect to be specific for us to add anything or change anything, but we're happy to do that. The other thing that we're doing is taking the number of uses and also consolidating that into kind of a broader category of uses. So if you look at the middle column here, you'll see that we have currently all of these uses spelled out, defined in our zoning ordinance. And sometimes in different chapters, you'll see 833, which is those areas surrounding the city of Bloomington. And then 802, which is some of the more rural areas. And that these uses in black would actually be all under the umbrella of retail sales, small, medium, and large scale. And then we would have a way of defining small, medium, and large in the definitions. So my question for you all is just in looking at this middle column and just knowing what you know about what these mean to you, do you have concerns about consolidating any one of these to be in this same general category?
And all of the individual definitions will still remain, right? So we will still have a definition for
Music store, marine supply, yes.
I'm sorry, maybe you express, how do you plan to define small, medium? Is it by square footage, by foot traffic, by?
What was the question?
The small, medium, and large, how do you plan to define that? Is that by like square footage, by
It
foot
is-
traffic, by?
By square footage currently, so, right now, if you were to go to the definition of retail sales. So we have drafted to say, for instance, retail sales, small facility or establishment not involving outdoor display of goods with equal to or less than 3,500 square feet. So if you were to hit over 3,500 square feet, then you would be into the medium category. If you're more than 10,000 square feet, you would get into the large category, and then beyond 60,000 square feet, you would get into the big box category.
What's the last one for big box?
60,000.
60,000.
So the volume, which I know you can't necessarily figure that until a business is operating, but the volume of turnover, what like traffic, foot traffic and stuff that a retail store creates has no effect on, if they're a really small store, they could operate in something zoned for small, even if they have hundreds of people coming through the door every day.
I know what you mean, yes.
I don't know how to put that into.
Yes, so we are going to have, such as like parking and landscaping standards. We are hoping to establish some sort of equivalent intensity measure that would be a design standard. But if you believe that there needs to be some sort of definition that would address that type of concern, like let's say you have a CVS, let's say, and there's a lot of people coming in and out every day versus retail sales of like a smaller mom and pop store that sells antiques or like sewing equipment, things like that. If you believe that those two things, based on size of the building alone, should not be the defining factor, and you would wanna see like some sort of like delineation of those two, the options could be either make the CVS stores somehow different from that category altogether, either define it separately, or you could try to have a definition that says, something to the effect of, something that we can enforce. So we can't really, the planning department is not going to go in and do like a number count on the number of people going in and out of the door. So that's I think what makes it a little bit more challenging.
Well, and I'm thinking about it from like the land use, because this is gonna like, small, medium, and large are only gonna be allowable on certain zoning, right? It's not like they're all allowable, and anything that can accommodate a small is also gonna be able to accommodate medium and large, right?
Right.
So I'm thinking about, because like there are furniture shops or like mattress stores and stuff like that that require the same amount of footprint as like a grocery store. But a grocery store is gonna have so much more foot traffic and have a larger impact on the surrounding zoning and roadways and things than say a mattress store. People are not buying mattresses daily. So that's kind of my thought process is how do you plan to, and also that in that same regard, grocery stores should be in, when we go into the housing situation, they should be in zones that are closer to like where residential's not necessarily as convenient as a mattress store. I don't know, maybe it's more discussion people want to have, but these are just kind of the thoughts that.
And to continue on that topic a little bit too, I'm wondering, using mattress store as an example, maybe they only have a half a dozen mattresses in the store that you can look at. But if they're getting deliveries in and out, that's gonna be semis or at least box trucks coming and going, even if their square footage is under 3,500. So I think from that perspective, using square footage as a A way to measure concerns me a little bit.
And I think that we should also incorporate something about drive-through pickups. I know this is a restaurant, this is just retail, but there is drive-through in retail. And I think if it's something with drive-through, that we have to always treat it, no matter the size, as large, for example, because then we want to make sure that it's, you know, got good traffic and
That's
space
a
and all
really good
that.
point.
Yeah.
I just would like to request that in the consideration of these standards, that we think very carefully about the potential to game it. For example, going by square footage could overemphasize the square footage at the expense of the traffic. But somebody who wanted to emphasize the traffic could game it for considerations on other standards that might be needed for the size of the building. And so that it should be kind of both the volume of the building as well as the volume of the people they anticipate having. And, you know, always trying to think through a way to prevent the gaming of the system.
I think to Jackie's point, the question is, how do you ever follow up on that?
Yeah.
And I think somebody that's going to have a lot of volume is going to want more parking, or they're gonna have a drive-through, or both. And so that may be the tell for us, right, about what they're actually anticipating business-wise. I mean, I know we have parking allocations and whatnot, but you know what I'm saying? Because we can't go back in a year and go, oh my gosh, your business is twice what you said it would be, now what are we gonna do?
But I'm thinking of, for example, Chick-fil-A, where the employees are actually working outside and the traffic is spilling out onto Third Street and keeping, and creating traffic hazards.
Right, exactly.
That if we put in a restriction that that's not permissible, that the employees must be working inside, or that they, you know, they must, you know, if traffic is hung up, that,
We do that.
you know,
I get what you're saying, but I don't know how you.
Well, there's
That's
already
gaming the
rules,
system.
there's already laws that say that we can't park in the public right of way with business.
well, they're doing it, so
Well,
nobody's.
Well, all I'm saying, well, yeah, I agree with that. All I'm saying is there's already something that says you can't
I
do
see,
that.
I see.
We do have drive-through, retail sales, and then obviously restaurant, we've categorized a little bit more thoroughly with sit-down, fast casual drive-through. So you could also think about, like I said, if you go back to that, presentation and show the different uses that you have concerns about. Let's say you have a concern about, I'm just gonna pull out sporting goods versus convenience store. If you think that those two things do not belong on the same property with the same considerations, and that, let's say you want a convenience store to have stricter standards, like more parking no matter what, more landscaping no matter what, more, it should have a lot size twice the size of what it should, you know, what its minimum requirement is, or what have you. Then I would say that the answer could be that convenience stores should not be consolidated into this. You could pull it out and make it its own use still and regulate it separate.
Yeah.
What we have right now is that a lot of these uses, if not all of them, have redundant standards and are permitted in the same zone. And so having them be further classified and defined is not really making a lot of sense for us. And what we get is, you know, like someone that's, instead of marine supply, they may be selling something very tangential to marine supply. Well, they don't exactly fit the definition, but they're very close to it. But we don't have this umbrella term to capture it.
Yeah, I think having all of these separated out is crazy. So I like the idea of consolidating them. I think so for example, I notice here you don't have gas stations, right? Because those are separate. So a convenience store without a gas station is one thing, and a convenience store with a gas station is another, right? Okay. And then in the red print, there's also big box in here too, right? So small, medium, large, and big box. Okay, I just want to make sure. Okay, because some of these I could see going big box. All right. I'm actually okay with that because I think it's, you know, we have the dirigible shops and then we have, you know, and then who knows in a year what new thing's gonna come up. Oh, we gotta change our ordinance because there's a new thing being sold and whatever, you know, it makes sense to call it, I think, retail and then find that scale.
Right.
I will, you know, to backtrack, I will say I do like the idea of the small, medium, and large for that exactly, you know, that purpose of simplifying it and stuff. My concern is, you know, because even within like you had, I'm seeing the sporting goods or whatever, sporting goods, you know, sporting goods can be something as big as large as like a Dick's Sporting Good or as small as like a tiny little mom and pop shop that sells tennis rackets and only tennis rackets, you know. So like, you know, the idea of it being able to be quantified by square footage and not just what you sell is nice from that. My concern is more so just the implication it has on where that zone falls based on what you're selling, you know, because.
Yeah, like you said, a small grocery store that gets really high traffic. Well, and the question could be that, I know that some of the planning research documents do say that you can have a similar use on the same property, but if you have enough landscaping and enough thresholds for parking and orientation of the building and what have you, does that address your concerns of the impact to surrounding neighbors, or do you feel like the traffic and amount of people coming to that site can just simply not be addressed through design standards and should only be addressed by saying, if you have this much volume, you just don't belong near a residential, you have to go far out. No matter how big your lot is, no matter how you design it, it just can't go there. You're just gonna have too many people come and go. That makes sense?
That makes sense. That's like a catch-22. It's like, it seems like you really could, that's the thing that you could sit around and discuss and argue for hours, I feel like.
Right.
I'm not saying I'm against the small, medium, large, big box thing. I think that's I really do support that. My concern is, will it create problems?
Yes,
Kinda,
it's always.
I'm being devil's advocate, I should say. Does it have the opportunity to create problems down the line? Because there are things in there that I think you could go through and say, well, they require a large footprint, but have very small traffic, while other things can be done in a small footprint, but require large traffic or have large traffic.
And by having those delineated footprints, which we do have a little bit of that in our current ordinance, but by saying, 3,500 is the cutoff, well, I was gonna have 3,600, but I'll just make the building 3,499 because I wanna fit into this zone and not this zone. That, I do see that happening, and I don't know how to address it, if.
Well, and then also, like you said, you gotta be able to moderate it too, and,
You have to explain it quickly to people, so.
Yeah, and I agree with what you're saying, Edward. I keep going back to the square footage thing. I realize it has to be delineated somehow. And I'm wondering if, loading dock requirements can be factored in somehow. Like if a loading dock for a semi is required, that bumps it up into a different category, or if all the deliveries will be in a box truck or something smaller. Because I know, downtown you see semis parked in the middle of Walnut Street all the time.
Yeah, so I think we always have to think about traffic, and we have to think about noise pollution, and we have to think about light pollution. I think all of those things have to be factored into the density and how it's assigned, right? So you could have maybe a small retail something, but they're going to have, a lot of traffic and noise and lights and big big box trucks going in and out all the time, semi trucks going in and out all the time, and then they may have to be categorized as a higher density use than small, but I think if we always have those things in mind, a number of parking spaces and light, noise, traffic, et cetera, I think that'll serve us well. We can't predict it all right now, so we just have to,
So maybe,
guidance, that's all we can do.
so other than having design standard specific, parking, landscaping, that even if your retail sales small, you may, if you're sporting goods versus pet shop, you might have a bigger buffer yard requirement based on some category of information that you provide to us. But also, if I had a definition that's like 3,500 square feet or less, and also, if you have a loading dock or if you require more than two, I don't know, like.
If you have a drive-through.
Okay,
you're
so
gonna
you just wanna have these caveats that say like, if any of these, you're not small, go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm sorry if we just spent more time on that than you were.
No, that's helpful. No, I think that's. Okay.
One thing that, as far as truck docks and semis versus van trucks, the kind of the component of that is if you have one semi truck, that can eliminate the need for 5 box trucks. So it's not always
Right.
and a lot of shippers, they'll, I think this terminology is correct. A lot of shippers will bid trucking contracts out as an LTL, which could be however that bid comes through and who can haul it. But I think that, there's 2 ways to look at this. One, we look at it as if we are plan commissioners or county commissioners or plan review committee members, and we are looking at something that's either a PUD or a rezone, we look at these things and we can trigger certain things with it, right? Traffic studies, blah, blah, blah. Or if we are looking at it from staff standpoint, we have somebody rolling in with a set of plans for a zone property and how that could be fit on property based on what staff can do, right? And the site constraints that Jackie was talking about, I think are, again, the burden or the pass-through that always comes up because so many of these triggers are formulated based on the size, the type, the use, how many parking spaces are required. What's the landscape buffer because you've got this business adjacent to this business or this use adjacent to another use. So, I'm not sure where that's going other than the fact that having just a laundry list of things that say you're big, you're small because of these items, I don't think getting into the minutia of that detail will necessarily give us what we want. So it depends on that list. And the one thing I'm thinking about is a truck dock, right? We already say that in our site requirements that you've got to be screened. Am I correct? For a truck dock, but that truck dock may eliminate several more trips on the public thoroughfare or a number of turning movements in or out.
Right, but is there enough space in the parking lot to turn around a semi versus a box truck, right? And
Yeah, that's a great
right,
example.
and then where's the nearest intersection and how do they get out into
So
main
then
drag, right? I mean,
and that may be a user function is maybe it isn't big enough to turn around a certain type of vehicle. So that user is going to learn real quick that type of vehicle's not permitted. It can't be used anymore because it disrupts their business. Right. So I think I think getting down into that list is some items on that list may be helpful. Other items, I think we could dig down too deep and it wouldn't be helpful. That's my thought.
Yeah, I think a lot of them, I see what you're saying. I think a lot of them are gonna be no-brainers, like light and noise, right? But then throw a sawmill in there and suddenly there's noise, and so, I mean, you wanna have it in there, even if most of the time it's gonna be like, okay, it's fine.
But we already regulate how much noise and light come off a property at the property line, correct?
Noise is a little bit more tricky, but light we do,
To measure that.
yes.
Okay, whatever, those are my thoughts on that.
Because retail oftentimes near residential or in the midst of residential, and that's why that becomes so important.
I wonder though, too, though, again, I'm sorry if I'm playing devil's advocate too much tonight, but your comment about how, well, if we're capping it off in square footage, now instead of going 5,000, I'm gonna just build my building to 4,999. And if it's like, oh, well, I don't qualify for small if I have a loading dock, that's okay. I'll just get trucks with lift gates, you know? I lived in Jackson County, there was a liquor store that had 4 semis come a week. Sold the most income or profit margin of all retail in Jackson County. They didn't have a loading dock. The truck parked on the edge of a state highway and unloaded via a lift gate, you know? Those things can still be done, you know, we live in a world where hydraulics exist. So it's, you know, I think that almost, does that really solve our problem? Because now you just don't have a loading dock and,
Creating.
yeah. I almost feel like maybe I made too much commentary, dug in too deep, but.
No, I think we have to figure it out.
So we are lacking loading docks in Monroe County. So if there was a way to.
A lot of the city, but that's.
Yeah, it's just, there's a lot, even smaller businesses are needing loading docks. And I'm starting to see some small, like out of Westbury, there's a couple loading docks, it's, you know, small overhead door loading dock, small office, and then the business can operate. I hate to discourage loading docks, yeah.
Oh, I don't think we're discouraging them. I think there's a place for them, you know, and I think it changes the retail. To me, it changes the scope of retail. But I get your point. You don't want to discriminate.
And this is the point about gaming. Gaming,
Yeah,
this is,
sure.
that's exactly the point about gaming it. So I think that, you know, that is for further review and consideration and maybe a dual system of evaluation so that, you know, we can just say, oh, come on, you know, you're moving into this size building and you need a lift gate, so you really need to be classified as this. Come on, don't try to work the system. We're all in this together, and if you want to come in here and do this, you need to do it with consideration for the community. You know, because for every rule, there's a creative way, you know, working to break it. And if we have a little bit of judgment in there by creating 2 standards, like volume of sales and volume of square footage of the building, then we can use some judgment that says, look, you know, you're gonna have to use 5 hand carts to get stuff in there versus 1 pickup truck. You know, you're in the wrong size building, or one freight truck. You're in the wrong size building, and you really need to be applying at this level. You know, we weren't born yesterday, type of thing. So it'll give ourselves some wiggle room in the approval process, so we don't end up with a mess in our neighborhoods. And that's what I think. You know, because I didn't just fall off the turnip truck.
Was it at a loading dock then?
Yeah. Let's turn up retail in there, I don't know.
Sell turnips here.
Sorry, I couldn't.
Follow the groceries.
For instance, retail sales small is conditional in the rural community 1, which would be near, you know, all the rural communities that we have zoned as such. So it would have to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals for review. So we have to create standards around that. And then the next zone that it would be permitted in would be, or conditional in, would be high density. So we don't necessarily have it, you know, right up against residential districts on purpose. And so we do have a way of saying, okay, we believe that these standards can be met and that they can meet the conditions and go to the Board of Zoning Appeals. There's still a review process that can be in place. just say, you know, I don't think that this qualifies for retail sales small.
What is the square footage of small again?
3,500.
33,500. You know, just put yourself in the shoes of and in the beds of the people living above the small retail where the deliveries will take place, and see whether or not and think about whether or not that's livable with the engines running and the deliveries and the freight deliveries. And conditional is good in that regard because I just don't, you know, I haven't run that kind of business.
So is it square foot, is it gross floor area? Is that what we're talking about? Or what is the 3,500?
I would say it would be gross floor area, so if it's 2 stories, both, you know, 1750.
So it's not footprint, it's gross floor.
I would think gross floor area.
Perspective, 3,500 square feet is a building that's about 60 feet by 60 feet. So just to put it in perspective, what kind of footprint that is, which is pretty small. In my
How did
opinion.
we come up with those numbers? I don't remember going through an exercise ourselves, but.
There you go. Very good.
I remember we went through some real world examples. We did go through, Ann was mentioning how we created those cutoffs between the different square footages. We did look at examples on the GIS of different retail in the area. We looked at, you know, for big box, we looked at the Walmarts, we looked at Menards, we looked at Lowe's. We saw what those square footages were. They well exceeded 60,000, but we thought that was an appropriate square footage. Also, other ordinances, I believe, so our ordinance right now is a 3,500 square foot cutoff for convenience store with gasoline sales. Otherwise, it has to be kind of a grocery store if you want to have a convenience store that sells retail. So that was something that we kept in line. And then those middle ground square footages, like Ann mentioned, we did look at real world examples. We also consulted with the city's UDO has similar delineations with building square footages. So we wanted to make sure that we were somewhat in line so that someone couldn't say, oh, I couldn't make it in the city, so I'm gonna go to the county. And though it's, you know, in the city, it's considered medium, in the county, it's considered small. So we wanted to make sure that we were comparative with what other ordinances said in the area. So I also have the example with, we're also consolidating industrial manufacturing. So just to give you an idea of the list of different specific things that we're calling part of this category, which we would roughly call industrial manufacturing. It makes it extremely difficult for staff to be able to place people in these individual categories. So it would be helpful to say, you know, industrial manufacturing heavy includes creating materials that have from raw materials, and also could include any number of these different uses individually, but, you know, can include further, you know, things like this. So that we are able to kind of, if it's not exactly one of these middle category uses, we can still umbrella term and call it industrial. So I wanted to bring this up to you all. We are keeping a running list of all of the new uses that we have, all of the consolidated uses that we have, so we can send that out if people have individual concerns and they want to say, you know, this use in particular should not be changing, or I don't like it consolidated. That's a good discussion for us to have in terms of the use table. And that's the type of feedback that we'd be seeking.
And so that's heavy. Are you gonna have industrial manufacturing medium and light?
We just have light and heavy.
Light and heavy.
Mhm.
And what is that also, did that delineated?
This is delineated a little bit different.
Obviously, I assume it's not square footage.
So let me-
Also, you have terracotta listed in there as Bloomington or Monroe County have a heavy terracotta industry.
I know. Yeah. This is our current ordinance, so.
Yeah.
So industrial manufacturing heavy, we have a current definition and then, we are adding to it to say such as this use encompasses, and then this would be where we consolidate the uses. So we have still these uses and their definitions individually defined. So that's how we're planning on consolidating these in practice, is that the definition is a little bit bulkier, but the use table is a lot cleaner.
That's the terracotta.
You know, there is a terracotta in Clay City. They make a lot of terracotta pots,
Yes, they do,
you know,
but that's Clay City.
that's Clay City.
We don't have that clay resource here.
That's why I kind of chuckled when I saw terracotta, but
But they had terracotta at that Cedar Bluffs. They had a lot of terracotta there, but they didn't make it. On the way to Ellisville.
Yeah, we're not making any perfume either, are we?
I would say a lot of these individual uses are just not utilized. When we did a review of site plans since, I think, 2010, I didn't see a lot of these individual uses utilized at all, which is why we were coming back and wanting to consolidate some of these to make it just a clearer code for people to use. moving
Burger
forward.
King makes perfume.
And that smells good.
But I love that perfume.
It comes from New Jersey.
Victoria.
Yeah.
Comes from New Jersey.
So does that answer your question, Edward?
yeah, I really like that idea. I think that makes your guys', or at least I assume that makes your guys' job a little easier, that being consolidated. I think, I'm a big fan of that, so
Okay.
it was more the square footage thing that.
Light versus heavy for industrial is a little bit easier of a delineation
Yeah,
because you're
for
either
sure.
dealing with end product, putting things together, or raw materials, creating items. So I think there's a little bit, we have that definition now. It seems to be working fairly well.
And under the, I don't know what the term is, the restrictions or the conditional statements or whatever, is there anything that, I know that from our side of stuff, like you were talking about, there's two ways to look at it, from us and then from you guys in the office. But for the heavy, does that have any connection to what types of roads are feeding that property? Because, you know, if a business is, you know, you would need some major collectors, some larger roads to feed some of those.
Yeah, so what you're referring to is if you were to go to heavy manufacturing under the use table, industrial manufacturing heavy permitted with standards, and you were to look up what those standards are, you're saying that you would say they would have to, let's say, like, have access off of a collector road. They can't be located off of a local road.
Yeah.
Is that kind of your point?
That's just kind of, is there any of that content?
Right now, all we have is that it must have access to sewer. So that would be helpful feedback if you would think that maybe a heavy manufacturing site should only be accessible from an arterial or collector road.
I'm just thinking about the impact it has on a county road as opposed to a highway or a major collector, or, you know, the impact on our road system, because that's,
Okay, so maybe check with the highway department. That's a good idea.
Heavy industrial is the only one that has outdoor storage, correct? There's nothing like light industrial. I don't think there's any others.
I think that, I don't believe that I think that maybe the way it is now, typically we do see light all happening indoors, but we have.
That is, so light
Okay.
manufacturing does have, within the definition, it does state processes that ordinarily do not involve significant truck traffic or railroad operations, down, where such processes are housed entirely within an enclosed building, except as may be authorized in a CDO.
So Storage, sometimes we would relate that to the use. And say
Yeah.
that's- And if people feel like that's not, you know, you wanna add outdoor storage as like, you know, an optional use that's conditional, that would be allowable under light, we could do that, or.
I think there's some light industrial that would like to have out that set storage, so it kind of limits where some of these companies can look to if it's only looking at heavy industrial, because you don't have a lot of heavy industrial land out there, or even properties available, that designation.
And just to kind of clarify what you mean by outdoor storage, are you talking about the outdoor storage of materials that will be utilized in the process of the light manufacturing, or are you talking about actual processes of manufacturing outside?
Materials.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, storage, outdoor materials, okay.
Well, and I would assume that also applies to not just the primary materials, but also the end product. That after they've manufactured said good, if it can be stored outdoors. then-
Fully outdoors or like covered or?
Well, I still think it needs to be.
Okay.
Basically, you know, I mean, I'm thinking outside, but I know like along Curry there, there's a couple of buildings I've dealt with where they've wanted to put outside storage, but we needed to have it behind a fence that was not visible to the public, you know?
Yeah.
Which I think that's fine.
Okay. Yep.
Would you back up to the initial table that you had on that, the use table? One that struck me was the welding under the, well, yeah, that'll probably work. And can you blow that up at all? I really haven't heard, I've seen it. Thank you. Oh, yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so welding, that's under industrial, under heavy. Is that correct? Go back to the initial table, and maybe I'm not reading it properly.
Your initial chart where you said industrial heavy and then all the uses that were going to be.
That's what you're saying, yes.
Yeah, so it's listed under heavy.
Yes.
And that's just one that, as I was going down the list, struck my eye. You could, even if you look at, trying to think of the welding companies in town or in the county. So there's Bruce's over off of Vernal Pike. It's in town. And I know there's some small welding. Thornton's is another great one thing. I guess my question is there a reason why that would be under heavy? Because it's, you think so?
I don't think it is.
Okay, because there's a lot more work that's done at shops like that where they're making a hog roaster or they're repairing an axle or it's not, yeah, go ahead.
So I think that just saying welding is misleading. So the definition that we have now and that's been rolled over is establishments primarily engaged in manufacturing welding equipment, electrical welding apparatus and accessories.
Oh.
So it's not really the act of welding. It's not creating welding equipment.
Okay,
It's
so.
not the service of welding.
Yeah, so what would, if Jeff wanted to start a welding shop that he wanted to take care of small repairs, what would we classify that under if he would want to do that?
Is he more like general contractor, you saying, or
Okay,
possibly that?
general contractor, that could work under that. Especially something.
Or dive into what's being repaired.
Yeah.
Isn't there one for like,
Farm machinery, discs, plows,
isn't there one for like small labor or like personal labor or something like that? Like something like woodworking and
Yeah.
those things? I forget what the name is on.
Artesian.
It's an artesian.
Artisan,
Yeah, artist.
not artisan.
Yeah.
I think you answered my question, and because under the definition of welding, it's more of a manufacturing operation where you're building car bodies. Where you've got a contract with Crane where you're putting belly pans on Humvees or something.
More than what Jeff can handle?
Well, when he's got his wife and his kids working, yeah. He can handle it. Okay.
Okay. So, the next topic, so I do wanna just move us along, I guess, in summary of these, if you take a look at the use table and we can send out that consolidated use updated list and you say, you know, I really don't like the idea that furniture is under industrial manufacturing heavy, I looked at the definition, I think it should be light, that would be something that would be helpful. Or if you think, there's some consolidation of something in here that's popular enough, like pharmaceuticals, and you just feel like, you know what, that should be its own use, we have enough of that in the county, it has use-specific standards, I think it needs to meet X, Y, and Z. Pull that out of being consolidated and have it be its own use. So those are the types of questions that we could, go forward with, but.
What's the process? Because I mean, I think it's very difficult to hit all the uses that are out there, because there could be ones we're not even. So someone comes to with a request on a use that's not on the table, what would our process be on evaluating that?
So right now, we are using that middle column, and a lot of times there are people that maybe don't have like a very specific use. What is happening more often than not is that we may have a broader use in one chapter, but not a broader use in the other chapter. So we're actually advising people to rezone in some scenarios, even though, let's say their current zoning is general industrial and they're moving towards heavy industrial. Under our conversion chart for the CDO, those two zones are essentially equivalent in a lot of ways. So it's creating additional processes for people.
Thank you.
Well, and I know from the city side, rezoning something is just something I would not even recommend someone going down that path, because it can be pretty cumbersome and hard. Is that a process in the county that we can see more often, more receptive to a rezone?
I think it depends on the property. I think that the CDO's goal is to kind of like not have redundant zoning districts with two different use tables. We want to make sure that there's clear zoning and one use table everyone gets to look at. You're in the county, you look at this use table. Right now, we have two separate use tables depending on where you are at in the county. And so some people may bring up to me, hey, I think I'm business services, but they're in the rural areas, and I'll have to say, well, that use doesn't exist in the rural areas, it only exists around Bloomington, and that creates a lot of confusion because it's one zoning ordinance and we should have one table. So the next item that I wanted to bring up for our work session is that we've consolidated, or we've received CDO survey responses on our CDO zoning map of people that are dissatisfied all the way to satisfied with their proposed zoning. We've taken this table here to the ordinance review committee, and they've come up with a recommendation for these different properties. And so now we're going to be asking the plan commission to review what the ordinance review committee recommended and come up with the final. Once we have the information from the plan commission, staff is going to go ahead and make the changes to the zoning map. And then that is going to be hopefully what we bring forward to the public and the plan commission. And then if, you know, anyone that is on this list that comes and says, hey, I asked this to be zone general business and you didn't change the map, we're going to say, well, we had a discussion at the plan commission and the ordinance review committee. You can visit this, link. And also you can come to the hearing and make your same or different claims and try and make your argument. So that's going to be coming forward to you. I think that it would be wise if I sent you the ordinance review packet with the information, not just this table, but information on the current zoning, the comprehensive plan zoning, so you can make those decisions and maybe come aligned with what your idea of recommendation would be. And then we will hopefully be able to kind of run through these in succession and be able to come up with a recommendation by the plan commission.
And so the plan commission votes on a recommendation, is that correct?
Yep, the plan commission is going to give us a recommendation, which we are then going to, as staff, make changes to the zoning map. If, let's say, this gets to the plan commission level, you will have made a decision about a certain area that should be zoned by a majority. We made the change in the zoning map, it gets to the commissioners, and they would prefer that that zone not be changed. We'll of course make that change back because that's the final voting body. That answer your question.
Good, I hope you have a switch on everything. Just go back and forth.
It's fairly easy to switch things. GIS makes it possible, but it is a lot of data, so we do wanna put our best foot forward with, this is what, everything.
And how many items are in this table?
This particular table, I think there's only about 20, so we'll give them to you in batches of maybe 20 to 30.
Oh, okay.
We're trying to do it by area, so this will be the south side of town.
Is, are you gonna have any, I'm assuming some of these properties you received more than one result or request or comment about. Is there a column in there that says like, hey, this particular property, we got this comment 8 times? Or we only got, this property was received 1 request by the homeowner,
Sure.
Or it's like, hey, this one was 9 requests by, all 9 were from the public.
Sure.
But I feel like that should also have,
Number of survey responses or number.
if it's one homeowner that wants to change his property, but if it's 10 public members that want to change a property, I feel like that should kind of have a little bit of weight on.
The decision. Yes, you'll be able to see the raw data in the packet too, so you'll.
Because I would want to change my home to whichever one is going to allow me to do anything and everything I want to do.
Right,
But
right. Yeah, it's all under consideration. Okay, I can add that and then send this out and then hopefully we can address it at the February meeting. Okay, so just in some of the questions that I have for you all. So first question, I'll go 1, 3, and then come back to 2 because I think it might be a larger discussion. So 1, do you want us to continue to use the Plan Commission administrative meetings to go over CDO work session topics and only administrative items? Or do you want us to revert back to introducing what will be at the regular meetings?
I think it's because we're in the middle of this, I think we need to use all the time that we can.
Okay.
That's just.
I agree with that.
I agree with that.
Okay. Continue to just use these as administrative meetings and work sessions. Okay.
And I think we can all just really make sure that we're all on top of what's coming up in the next packet. And we can send you questions if we have them for petitions or something.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe we, just a good reminder. Sorry.
That goes back to my question. Does staff find using administrative sessions helpful in advance of plan commission meetings? I think the CDO work sessions and administrative items, I think said this before, we've gotten away from the administrative meetings, being able to talk about bigger picture things.
Right.
So I like this.
Right.
But we don't want to hamper your staff from being able to utilize the administrative meetings in preparation for the plan commission meetings. That would be my only comment.
I think because there's an automatic second hearing for petitions that I at least feel like from my perspective, sometimes it can feel like you've had 4 hearings by the time you add the 2 admins and the 2 hearings. So I would say it's okay to just do it at the hearings, but from Anne's perspective as a current planner.
I would agree with that, with trying to get information from the petitioner. It's a little smoother with having 1 due date rather than 2 due dates turned around.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, there may be fewer waiver final hearing motions. Maybe, but maybe not, but maybe not.
I think the only thing I would add, because I'm more than fine with it, I think the only thing I would add is that if staff does have anything coming that they think, hey, this might be a hot topic, this might be something that's gonna take a lot of discussion. If you find it worthy of
Okay.
lofting it up at the admin meeting instead of waiting till the plan. If you think it's something that we're all gonna be bothering you with questions anyhow.
Introducing it early.
Introducing it earlier so we can bother you here instead of each of us coming at individual hours or individual emails, you know.
Sure.
So,
Okay.
and you guys use your discretion.
I think the plan review committee is usually a pretty good bellwether of the ones that are gonna have a lot of questions. If it doesn't go through plan review very smoothly, chances are is, and by smoothly, I mean without a lot of questions,
Yep.
that is, you're probably gonna find that happen at each step along the way.
Sure. So number 3 is a question of whether or not the plan commission feels like we're ready to proceed to module 3, which would just be starting to draft, getting a little bit cut off, landscaping, parking, signs, ordinance, if we want to start drafting those. It's not to say that we're approving module 2 and not ever able to edit or touch it. Again, it's just, we just want to make sure that we're structurally on the right track. If people feel like, you know, there's things that I don't like about the CDO, but generally speaking, I understand its structure. I think you're moving in the right direction. I will send you my comments, my notes. We can fix it. We can move on to module 3. That would be staff's question. What information do you need to proceed to module 3, or do you feel comfortable even tonight voting to say that you're ready to see this continue on its current track and to move on to module 3 drafting, all the while keep editing module 2?
I'm ready.
Yeah, I think we're ready. I don't know that we need a vote. I sounds,
Okay.
if there's consensus, it sounds like we should move forward and, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Then you're getting a lot of that depends on where staff is. I mean,
Yeah.
because it's your plate that's getting fuller, in terms of daily workload.
Right. I think, well, signs, for instance, you'll be seeing that at the plan commission this month. We do have an edit to that chapter forthcoming, just with the recent court cases come through. We're making some edits to that. And then parking and landscaping, I think we have a pretty good idea of what we want those to look like, but those questions about intensity and volume and those things will definitely need to be worked out with these chapters, so they do need some consideration and thought, which we'll have help with from the consultants.
And you address question 2?
So yeah, coming back to question 2, so you have the email in front of you. Jerry, did you get a copy? I printed out 10 copies. There's a copy. I can pull it up on the screen.
No, thank you.
But just to summarize it, basically,
Exactly.
there's a proposal to take a bill to the legislature that would essentially make it so that Monroe County cannot regulate 15% countywide slopes restrictions and instead make it more like 25%. Our understanding is this would not be targeted towards the environmental constraints overlay area. It would only be for areas outside of that. But we wouldn't know that until we actually see the bill drafted. So my questions for you is just how you wish to be involved. So staff is putting together, and they've asked us essentially for information. So we put together the information, sort of the history of why we have the slope restriction set to 15%. What are some of the justifications? Why the 15% delineation? And we're hoping to send that to this person, Mr. Hall. Yeah, and help, they've asked for that information, which I think is good line of communication. And then we will also have to be following it to see if it gets introduced and then go up to Indianapolis.
Dee's answering.
Oh, sorry. Dee, you wanna go ahead and ask a question?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. You know, we already have a mechanism for dealing with it. It's called the BZA. So that would be my comeback on this. If you have an opportunity to do that, if there's anything outside of the Echo One area that needs to be dealt with, they can go to the BCA and it'll be dealt with there. There's no reason to have a special law. That would be my input.
We hope to put together data on that as well, Dee, because there is a current allowance for lots that don't have any buildable area to be able to construct a single family residence. So it's only really on lots that have buildable area that they don't want to work within those constraints and they want to build on non-buildable area that we see those variance requests. So it's even a subset of the properties that are non-buildable.
Right.
So we can pull that data.
I'd like to ask if this legislative proposal is similar to what those introduced by former Representative Jeff Ellington in past years.
This is different.
This is different.
This is different, yeah. The previous ones were, you know, you can subdivide any property, et cetera. I mean, and then logging.
Logging, there was a lot of logging.
There was something that he talked about with slopes, but that was quite a few years ago, but it never made it to even the proposed stage. So we do have a lobbyist that we utilize. So we'll connect with him and let him know our issues, of course. And if you're all right with that, I'll give him your email address for data, county.
Okay.
And mostly what he does is he keeps us apprised of what's coming. And he gives us insight into goals, plans, you know, sort of broad brush kind of things. And then he'll keep us apprised if there's something that we don't and we're interested in, and then we can go and offer testimony at a hearing. So we'll, you know, if it does get to that point where there's this is a short session this year, but if it does get to the point that there's a hearing, we could always, you know,
send a representative.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and folks who are on this planning commission may want to go as well. But usually what they do right now with hearings is they're very limited in how many people can speak. So they may only want one person from Monroe County speaking, or maybe two.
Yeah.
So it can be difficult. The one thing that I've noticed when I've gone to testify before the land use subcommittee, I should say, of the House, is that it depends on who's on that committee. But when I went last time, which was a couple of years ago, I haven't had to go in a couple of years, which is nice, that a lot of the representatives on that committee resided in the northern half of the state, which is very flat. And so it's crucial to tell the story of what goes on in the southern part of the state, and how we have a very different issue with slopes and runoff, and then we've got a lake that's our drinking water supply, and you know, it's not something that they're all familiar with, and so sometimes there's just a lot of education.
So I would like to know what information you're going to send back to Representative Hall.
Okay.
If you could share that with us.
A draft of the email.
Yeah.
Okay.
That would be useful for us.
We really could, because I know him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and then if you guys would be able to send me edits.
Yeah.
Yeah, glad to.
Okay.
Glad to.
And if you don't mind, if I could even send the draft to our lobbyist?
Yes.
So he's okay, thank you.
I think Margaret and Jerry.
I'd just like to point out the contradiction that in the fourth paragraph, that his counter was that he's sticking up for the rights of private landowners, and yet we have involuntary annexation in Monroe County and in the state of Indiana, and we're only one of 3 states that allows for that. And so if he's interested in property rights, he should be consistent. That's all.
Legislation
Oh, that's a good
was
point.
involved in
Yeah,
that, yeah.
I just want to make the point that I don't believe necessarily that the percentage of slope is always the only tale, because there are mitigation efforts, there are ways of contouring ground that, you know, where the disturbance is not always an impact the way that we might assume. It's not like everything's left in bare soil and all that, because I know that we've had enforcement cases where we've walked away and said, you know, really to do anything to change this would create more damage than the repair itself, you know, so anyway, I just, the essence of it is that whether the state's doing it or the county is doing it by ordinance, just a straight percentage of slope being the determination of whether or not land can be disturbed is somewhat troublesome to me, because I don't think disturbing land in an 18% slope is necessarily detrimental as an erosion hazard if it's done in a proper way. So that's my thought on it.
I think this in some ways sets a scary precedent too, if the state's coming in and trying to override what the county is recommending, you know. First it could be slope, then it could be density or, you know, anything else on our CDO.
yeah.
And water.
Yeah, and, no, I agree. I think it flies in the face of what you would typically see from a conservative legislature, which is home rule rules. You know, typically, you know, a conservative legislature would want localities to make decisions for themselves, but this is not at all what they're doing.
Very top down.
Yes.
I think one thing we're looking at here are two issues, and I think that what we've just said here, with what Jerry's points of view are, and with, for instance, what Jeff mentioned, that one issue is whether or not a certain measure of a slope is appropriate or not, whatever that number is, right? The other one is whether or not legislatively, just like Julie said, the state can come in and mandate something like that. So they're kind of two different issues there. One that we got to handle locally, because I don't know that as I look at the development history since, let's just say 1985 to now, and the measures that we put in place to remediate some of the development practices that have gone on. For instance, the beginning of Rule 5, it basically dropped down to 1 acre. Rule 5, I think, started out because of a 5 acre disturbance area. Then we dropped it down to a 1 acre disturbance area as a quick example, right? And at the same time, we've affected density, property values, and other things with the implementation of a 15%, 18%, whatever we want to call it, kind of in that same time period. So one question I would have is, have we got any metrics that have measured what benefit or what harm we've done, one way or the other? And I'm just trying to look at it straight down the line, because I've seen the 15% slope and the slope measurements and frankly, some of the cockamamie ways we've defined that over the years, even in the middle of the ordinances, that have not been reasonable or consistent. And so those are the things I think. So I think there's two approaches that we're looking at. One is whether the state can come in and say, hey, this county's got to do this, this, and this.
They can't say that.
They
Can't
can.
say that.
Sure they can.
Or whether or not we think that internally the policies are reasonable.
Yeah.
So those are just my points.
Yeah, I would agree with what you said. I think that would work, but in another way, I also think that there are a lot of things that have changed since the 80s. And I think we could look at the health of Lake Monroe and say, wow, what's happened here? How has this gotten worse? And why is there more silt and is the answer related to land use or is the answer related to something else? I mean, I think that's the problem that you run into. I think just having more traffic, the change in the patterns of weather, I mean, we may get our first snowfall Saturday. I mean, this is January.
They get our own.
The changes in the weather patterns. So for example, we know this is true at the solid waste management district because of the way that rainwater is pooling and how often they have to manage the landfill affluents and because we're getting, the same amount of rain, but it's coming faster and, so everybody's weather is changing. And the fact that you have more people living in the county and you already have put these new developments in, and how does that impact? So you can do something on plot A that is really heavy usage of the land and creates a lot of runoff, and then say, now because of this in plot A, plot B next door is oh, well, we can change the slope because normally that would be fine, but plot A is so intensive in its usage and is providing so much more in volume of stormwater, and now this changes how B can be utilized because A is utilized this way. And I think A in this case is typically the city because there's a huge stormwater issue between the city and the county that's not been addressed. So all of that being said, I hear what you're saying. Yes, if all things were equal, I could see that. I just don't know how we would take into account all of those factors. Sorry.
Do you see a time when the county or any county or any land use regulatory body would sell impervious cover trade-offs like they do carbon trade-offs?
This is Indiana, so yes. 49th out of 50, we're aiming for 50 out of 50. We want to go to the bottom. Speaking of that, Tampa is investing into water quality management, and they're doing something to improve water quality, and good cities around the country are doing things to improve water quality, not just try to squander it as fast as possible. So, I think that we should be thinking about that in terms of our economic development. What are we doing to protect what we have? I think the expiration date on Lake Monroe is 2050 and rapidly coming upon us and reducing. So I don't know, there's no backup plan.
And
so we shouldn't be attracting business here. We shouldn't be attracting families here. We should say our water situation is such that you should go elsewhere.
That's an interesting way to think about it.
Yeah, 2050, this is 2024. I think it's down to 2040. That's what I've heard, that it's evaporating
I
and
thought it was like 2046 or something.
Something.
The year,
Yeah,
but that was based on when it was built. Yeah.
it won't be defunct then, but.
No, but clearly it was only built for, it was only built for short term. And the question is, how do we maintain it? How do we protect it so that the businesses and the residents that are here have a water supply?
Absolutely.
I mean, I think that's the thing people forget about.
That's right.
Is we already have people here. We already have businesses here. How do we protect them?
That's right.
That's a good point.
Well, back to the question of this legislator's proposal. Bernie's comments made me think of something, and that is, I think useful information would be how many times BZA has accommodated a change in slope impacts. And so to meet the property owner's interests. Proposal.
But we don't know the impact of it.
We don't know the impact
Right.
thereof,
Right.
but we do know that,
Way to think about it.
we do know that BZA has granted
Yes,
some appeals.
yes.
There's got to be a way to, I think this is something I just want to think about more, because I get your point, but I don't know how you take into account all the factors and how could we do that? And maybe there's some way we could think about getting the right data that'll help us.
I guess the thing I'm getting at too is, if we're using a 15% slope or 18% slope or blah, blah, blah slope as a regulatory impact gauge, are we using it to establish a buffer zone? Are we using it to say that you can't build or you can't disturb a 15% slope because you're gonna have excessive erosion? And those are two different trains of thought, right? And whether or not the 15% slope or some other sort of criteria, I don't want to get out in the weeds, I've do that enough. But if there's a criteria out there that we're naming it because we want to stop something over here and saying this is the cause of some effect, then that's a problem. And I don't know that anybody can say that the 15% slope versus an 18% slope has saved this.
Right.
Or stopped.
Right, but at the same time, I hear you. And at the same time, 25% is very different.
It's really,
It's really different.
you don't want to walk up.
And at the same time, I think it really depends on the soils and if there's karst and where this is and how close it is to a floodplain. And, you know, there's all these factors, right? But you can't use all of those. So we use slope because it's something that's a recognizable number, right? And I know that development of those percentages took a lot of time and a lot of debate in this body and elsewhere.
I said make cisterns great again.
Well,
So, yeah, so I think that's why we've landed on slope. And the idea is to prevent erosion and to not impact negatively on surrounding businesses and homes, to protect their drinking water supply, to protect our roadways that we've invested millions of dollars in. You know, there's a multitude of things, but you have to have something you can put into a code, right? And I think that's why we've always settled on slope as that number.
I'm not disagreeing.
Yeah. But maybe there's another way to think
But
about it, so.
I think those goggles are not,
They're not always the best.
they don't say marketing the county for residential and industrial or commercial development. Those aren't the goggles that solve that problem.
Yeah,
if we're worried about the water supply.
And the current slope restrictions we have don't always protect homeowners in neighboring parcels either. And they don't always protect the lake, and they don't always protect our drinking water supply, and they don't always do the other things we wanted. So the numbers we have aren't working either.
Always is a tough goal.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
I'm with you.
so have there been any studies of permitted actions on 15% or greater slopes? Has anybody gone out and looked to see?
I wonder if Kelsey would know that.
So the 15% area countywide restriction.
Yeah.
So that's only been in place for about, going on 9 years now.
9 years,
So we
yeah.
would have we'd have pretty good data on where that, you know, if you're thinking of like properties that we've maybe asked them to not develop on the steep slope and instead develop on the flat land, we would have data on like aerial imagery of what that ended up looking like. You know, if it was like tree cover prior and then wasn't tree covered in the flat area. Is that kind of your question of like how things got built out or what?
My question is how things actually got built out when they were allowed to build on
Steep slopes.
steep
prior.
slopes.
Okay, so pre-2015 versus post-2015.
And anecdotally, we know from the people who live in Clear Creek that the hyper kind of elimination of green space in the city and building up to the side, right up to the sidewalk or the street, they claim that that has a direct relationship on their increased incidence of flooding.
The flood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think that if anything, cities should be required to coordinate with the county so that the damages in the county don't accrue just to the property owners.
Yeah.
You know,
I think we've got a problem with directions.
so, yeah.
It can still be a discussion point for the CDO too, if there's, I mean, there's current exceptions, there's current language, if we don't like it, if we wanna change it, that's up for discussion, so I think this will be this will be a good discussion point moving forward for the CDO and for this, any other comments?
If I can ask kind of a more kind of learning question, is there any sort of, during the BZA, the permitting process, is there any sort of, inquiry done to like footprint and area that's going to be impacted? You know, if you're impacting, say, a 20% slope to build a 2,000 square foot house, as opposed to a 20% slope to build a acre parking lot, you know, not that that's probably not possible, but you know, is that is?
Yes, the
Okay.
variance that's given is specific in acreage or in square footage.
Okay.
The site plan that you send to the BZA with your proposal is essentially what you're granted a variance for. You can't just say, oh, I got a variance from buildable area on this whole parcel, I can do whatever I want now.
And so there was like one house that had a little corner that it needed, you know, I mean, there are variances that sometimes make sense and then
There's smaller variance requests and then bigger variance.
Actually, so we have the slope for erosion. What kind of limitations do we have with septic systems and what kind of slope are those?
Yep, those also require 15% or less,
Okay.
so.
Yeah, and I wonder if this proposed legislation is gonna change that to 25% as well.
I don't think so, because it had to be coming 15 by.
I know, but that doesn't stop the legislature from
being stupid.
Dave, can you change the administrative code through Indiana code? Or do you have to, like the health department's regulations are through the administrative code, so someone could go through the Indiana code and enforce something?
Yeah, the Indiana code delegates authority to the administrative agencies to adopt rules, so they could implement the types of rules they adopt.
Okay, so it'd be a.
They'd have to amend their rules
Yeah.
for the new.
Yeah, so that was one of the things we'll bring up as well, so
Yeah.
septic still have to abide by the 15%, so
That's a really good
it
point.
might be self-limiting anyways, I think it's an estimate.
That was on your email, and then the other study that was done about the 15% slopes back like 8, 9 years ago, 10 years ago. Started talking about this then, was on that email.
Yes.
There were some really good things in that email, so, yeah, I thought that was really
We'll
helpful.
draft together and send that to you all.
You said you already sent this email out.
No, it was just sort of a task list of the kinds of information we wanted to gather.
Did you say you sent this out?
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay.
I can send that out to you, also you have a digital, and then also the staff reply draft. Okay. Any other comments or questions? That was all I have for tonight.
You guys continue to do a great job. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you all.
Hey,